Hi everyone, I'm DeWall and welcome to my new podcast where I talk about healthcare throughout the world. My first episode focuses on a comparison between the US healthcare system and that of Switzerland. Now imagine, if you will, I'm going to set the scene and I want you to picture this. In the middle of the night, two expectant mothers head to the hospital to give birth to their babies. One is in the US and the other across the world in Switzerland. The American mother's access to healthcare is largely dependent on her ability to acquire healthcare from her employer or her partner's employer if she has one. So, if she is not employed full-time or has insurance through a partner, she may be worried about how to pay for her care. She may be forced to leave the hospital before she's ready, any number of detrimental scenarios. Meanwhile, the mother in Switzerland does not need to worry about insurance because it is mandatory and universal. She and her baby can expect comprehensive care with no worries. Healthcare in the United States and healthcare in Switzerland are markedly different, and while the Swiss system is not perfect, some policymakers in the US have cited many aspects of the Swiss system as ideas for the United States to emulate or copy. Now, before getting into some specifics, let's just talk about some more well-known and general aspects of the healthcare system in America compared to Switzerland. Now, let's concentrate on the U.S. system first. People living in the U.S. have private insurance coverage based primarily on employment, which could lead to major gaps in coverage when switching jobs or losing a job. Also, only 10% of the population can purchase insurance on their own, and everyone else must rely on their employer, and that's from the New York Times. And the U.S. government funds Medicare for people of age 65 and over, and Medicaid and CHIP for veterans, low-income people, and the disabled. One improvement was made recently in the Affordable Care Act, which extended coverage for young people to age 26 on their parents' plan in open health insurance marketplaces, which offer subsidies for lower income people or help from the government with those sort of expenses. The federal government tries, emphasis on tries, to control costs in the programs that they run, but most Americans have private health insurance, so there are limited options. Unfortunately, in the United States, people without health insurance tend to live sicker and die younger than people with health insurance. And that's a direct quote for the New York Times, and everything else I said was from the Commonwealth Fund. Now that's enough about the United States, and let's talk about Switzerland. This is from the New York Times as well. Swiss healthcare is guaranteed for all because everyone must buy insurance for themselves because it's mandatory. Private insurers are required to offer coverage to all citizens, and insurance companies offer a mandatory basic plan on a not-for-profit basis. Insurance companies are permitted to earn a profit only on supplemental plans. The supplemental insurance covers greater choice of physicians and better hospital accommodations, like better hospital rooms, that sort of thing. Individuals pay premiums under the insurer of their choosing, and then funds are redistributed amongst the rest of the country through a central fund. Now, the Swiss do pay deductibles and 10% coinsurance with a cap. And one example of how Swiss healthcare differs markedly from that of the US is with maternity care. Now, maternity care and preventative service are fully covered. In fact, all women in Switzerland have maternity coverage, which includes prenatal care, delivery, a week-long stay in the hospital where mothers are taught how to take care of their babies, and postnatal visits to the mother's home. And this is a huge difference from the U.S. Women in the U.S. could only dream. Now, from the Commonwealth Fund, I have these following facts, which is government regulates drug prices and fees for lab tests and medical devices, and this keeps the costs down. Now, everything is free. Patients are required to share some costs to discourage unnecessary treatments. This also helps keep the costs down. The Swiss government provides cash to people if insurance is more than 8% of their income, so no one has to live in poverty just to afford health care, which is a right for everyone. Finally, this is a big point of contention to the United States. In the United States, Swiss patients are protected from charges on pre-existing conditions or being denied coverage due to them. Cost is obviously a major concern when it comes to healthcare, and there are big differences between the two countries in this area. Now, the US has by far the most expensive healthcare system in the world based on expenditure per person in percentage of GDP or gross domestic product. The US healthcare expenditure is 17% of the GDP or all the funds in the US, and Switzerland is only 12% how much they spend on things. US per capita or per person spending on healthcare is $11,072, and in Switzerland it's only $7,732. Big difference. In the US, medical costs are a significant contributor to bankruptcy. One of the reasons for the high costs in the US is they estimate about 20% is spent on administrative costs and the fact that healthcare providers are no longer always nonprofit. Another thing that drives up costs in the US is the high proportion of people that are uninsured. Conditions tend to become emergencies because they go untreated because of no insurance, because people are too scared to go to the ER or seek help because of how much it would cost. And ICU and ER treatment is more expensive. Now, healthcare doesn't only affect consumers, but doctors as well. And let's start with the Swiss system on this topic. Swiss physicians feel pressured by government regulators and insurance companies to hold down costs. In fact, insurance companies send doctors warnings that they are prescribing too many drugs or too many expensive procedures. Swiss doctors can't justify treatments. They can be forced to repay insurers for part of the prescribed medical services. Malpractice judgments are limited in Switzerland, which reduces insurance costs, and the Swiss government funds medical schools so doctors leave school with almost no debt. In contrast, American medical students usually graduate with $100,000 in debt, the Commonwealth Fund. And that's from the Commonwealth Fund, I meant. Businesses are also a huge factor in who gets healthcare and certain decisions made about healthcare because they have a role in distributing it, specifically in the US. Historically, corporate America does not support a publicly financed system, even though universal coverage would cost employers less in taxes than they pay for insurance. For example, employers would not pay for medical care under workers' compensation, and American businesses resist universal health insurance because they worship a marketplace ideology. In fact, business leaders think single-payer options are socialism, yet they support Medicare. Also, employers remain reluctant to hire full-time employees because of the cost of health insurance. Now, with corporate America resisting a publicly financed system, increases in healthcare costs unfortunately slow job growth, suppress wage increases, and put American businesses at a disadvantage in world markets. Since the two countries being compared are not even remotely close to each other, they have two completely different ways of life and cultures. The way of thinking in both countries contributes to how insurance is distributed, as well as many other things. Now, this is all from All Things Considered, the following. Healthcare performance is actually a reflection of national culture, and in Switzerland, everyone pays the same, yet the Swiss overall find that to be unfair because of the difference in people's income. Here's an example of how our American way of looking at things is different from the Swiss because of how individualistic it is. When asked by an American reporter if the Swiss object to being required to buy insurance, a Swiss citizen replies, "That question is very American. Americans are used to being individualistic and having to take care of themselves, which doesn't take into account the people that need help from a social net. The Swiss people are willing to provide each other in ways the Americans are not," proven by that quote. Some people attribute this to the fact that Americans descend from immigrants, from European countries that do not believe in redistribution to everyone. Now, in terms of outcomes, when compared with the United States, Switzerland takes the cake. Compared to other industrialized nations, the U.S. has some of the highest infant mortality rates and the lowest life expectancies. This is a real failure when compared to the Swiss system. The Swiss report a 90% satisfaction level with the system in Switzerland, and only 40% are satisfied with the system in the U.S. And the U.S. isn't entirely last in everything compared to other countries when it comes to healthcare, though, and because the U.S. ranks highly in responsiveness in that sort of category, in which is defined as being responsive to patients' expectations in terms of being treated with dignity and respect. So there's one plus. Switzerland has laid out a great model for a healthcare system. This is proven by statistics and outcomes. Both Democrats and Republicans in the US could find things they like in the Swiss healthcare system. For example, Democrats want 100% universal coverage and subsidies for everyone to afford coverage. And Republicans want choice, competition, consumerism, and capitalism. All these things can be found in the Swiss healthcare system. That's from Tincture. That's a direct quote from Tincture as well. And although the US may compare unfavorably with Switzerland when it comes to healthcare, the US still has some of the best hospitals and doctors in the world for those who can afford it. Still, Switzerland comes out on top when it comes to this particular subject. Who could resist a social net when it comes to insurance, freedom to pick your specialist, not having to worry about whether or not you have to go to the hospital based on if you're covered, and actual statistics that prove you will get the best care possible to make sure you are healthy? America definitely should keep an open mind and maybe use some ideas from the Swiss the next time the healthcare debate goes up. Thank you all for joining me, and tune in next time for a look at Canada's healthcare system pros and cons. Stay healthy.